What is up? Welcome to another edition of the Utilization Report. I am Marcus Grant, joined by Dwain McFarland. And Dwain, we have made it through draft season. It was a long, interesting journey to get there, but we get through the draft. And you and I were talking before the show. We have landing spots. We have things to talk about with these guys that we were just speculating on for months on end. And to that point, you and I have had a cavalcade of stars throughout this draft season. Who have we talked to? We've talked to J.J. Zacharyson, Trevor Sikkema, Matt Waldman, and our goodness of guests continues today, correct?
Yeah, we have got another Matt, the Matt Harmon of Reception Perception of Yahoo, a superstar. So yeah, you're on point with that, Marcus. So we're super glad to have Matt on, and we're going to talk about something he knows a little bit about. Wide receivers,
off-ball linebackers.
Like you mentioned.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, off-ball linebackers. I also heard he specializes in long snappers as well. So we'll get to those. But yeah, Matt, welcome to the show, man. We are so glad to have you on.
Yeah, I actually prepared for strong safeties today, so that's
we can
okay.
pivot.
If we want to pivot and talk off-ball linebackers, that's great. If we have to do the receiver thing, I suppose that's fine. But no, I appreciate you both for having me on. I love the post-draft analysis more than the pre-draft analysis. I say that a lot on the show. It's like, listen, I enjoy just kind of talking about these guys in a sense of, okay, where are their strengths and weaknesses? Where do they win? Et cetera, et cetera. But really, we're able to, I think, put that information into action so much more and like give listeners, readers, viewers, subscribers, whatever, some real paths forward with these players and like expectations once we actually know where they're going to play. So really, like, even though I feel like most people want to talk to me before the draft and like get a preview of this position, this is really the real stuff. So I'm happy to be on today.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because, with each guest, we've kind of started off with a first question where we didn't dive straight into the prospects. We talk a little bit about process, what you do. We want to give you the floor for that. But the third part of I had a 3-part question, a tri-prong question for you, Matt. But the third part of it, I'll go ahead and jump to that. I mentioned in there landing spots. Like, how much does that matter to you? Obviously, we've got the quarterback you land with, the target competition you may have, what does your depth chart look like? And then you have coaching and scheme, right? And some coaches are just better than others at being able to unlock certain aspects to a player. So that was part of the question. So maybe now is just a good time to answer that. How much does landing spot, influence your view? Or do you still believe it's more talent driven? Ultimately, that talent's going to rise to the top.
Yeah, I think if you think about it in like a pie sense, I think the biggest slice of the pie is still talent and player ability. Because I would say that, for certain guys, I think they project best to certain roles, right? And I mean, you could then argue, like, are they less talented because that focus becomes more narrow, right? Like, I think a guy like Roman Wilson's a great example of this, where I can see what Pittsburgh wants out of Roman Wilson. Specifically, I can see a role for him as like a speed slot receiver that handles maybe 5 to 6 targets a game. He blocks really well. Again, that fits with Pittsburgh. You want him on these big over routes on play action. Again, that fits with Pittsburgh, but that's still a pretty narrow application of the player I'm talking about, right? So I think that is, even if it's a utilization conversation, it is still a talent conversation. I know you talk about this all the time, Dwain. Like, a lot of what you're looking at in the utilization report in the season is still like, hey, how good are these players, right? Like, because the coaching staff decides they're good, they hand them this role. So I still think talent's the biggest thing, but landing spot, less so about target competition because that's fleeting, less so about quarterback play because, again, that's fleeting too. Guys can get replaced. It is still going to be a stumbling block to start your career, especially if you're looking at it from a dynasty perspective. You could see these guys lose value from year 1 to year 2, shoot even to year 3. But the biggest thing to me, what I care about landing spots is, like, what is the role on the team for the wide receivers? At this position especially, I just think it's so critical, right? Like, if you're a guy that projects best as an X receiver, what are the other guys in the roster? What do they look like, right? Like, if you're we'll have plenty of examples of that throughout the show, because a wide receiver is just different. Like, you can be a guy that has WR next to your name and do something completely different from your teammate. And is that best role that you project to available on the team? And if it's available on the team, how important is it into the offense? And kind of last thought on this, and this will definitely come up with certain prospects on the show. I wonder if we're seeing teams I don't want to call it like take a wide receiver by committee approach to the position. I'm not trying to put us in the running back zone with wide receivers, but at the same time, I do think that you're going to see certain teams take it because there are just so many quality wideouts out there that it doesn't make sense to funnel like 130, 140 targets to a player, just because by default. Like I think you'll see teams maybe have like wider spread out target trees than ever. And that is going to matter for certain landing spots as well.
Yeah, that's something the data has definitely shown us over the last few years, that the targets are starting to spread out. And I think a lot of it comes back to, what you're talking about. A couple other quick things before we jump to the first name. They go along with the landing spot. And I love what you said there. And I think some of it does depend, like you mentioned, what's the lens you're looking at here? Is it dynasty? Are you in a rookie draft, or are you just looking at season long for 2024? And obviously then like that pecking order, matters even more. Like, can they get on the field? But a couple of other things kind of back to that talent side. You've been studying this stuff for a long time now, the reception perception, like how many years now, Matt?
Just over 10 years now is
10
when
years,
I
man.
started formulating the idea and started
this.
putting out NFL info 10 years ago, which it's wild, man.
I remember one of your first big reveals was Tyler Lockett. Like that's how far back I remember reception perception. And you were right.
Right. I was right. So thank you for bringing up something I was correct about. But it's funny, like reception perception now is at a point where guys that were the guys at the beginning are starting to age out. And even Allen Robinson, great example, was a guy, and he's like kind of aged out of the league at this point. Lockett, I think, is sort of getting to that zone of his career. That has been weird. I mean, like Marcus, as the resident old on the podcast, definitely understands this, but it is weird. It is weird to feel like guys that, again, reception perception is going to outlast a lot, like hopefully all of these players, right? Because I'd love to be doing this as long as possible. So yeah, the 10-year mark definitely hit this year for sure.
Well, real quick on that talent side, and this is kind of you can talk about both sides of this, but in your experience, now that you have, got so much of it, you're a seasoned veteran at this stuff, Matt. Obviously we're always still learning, but on the positive side, what's something that, when you're watching a player and you see this certain trait, you're like, man, I know this player is going to be successful. And then on the flip side of that, you may see something that you're like, they don't have this. And in my experience, I've not really seen receivers suddenly develop that skill at the next level. And there may not be an exact example of that. Maybe you can improve at everything. But one of the things I love about what Matt Waldman does, he's kind of got these, I forgot what he calls them, not strikeout criteria, but basically, he will tell you like, look, this player's got a problem in this area, and I'm just going to tell you it's typically really hard to fix. So like in your experience, like, have you seen those sort of things where it's really more, hey, the player's got it or they don't?
Yeah. So on the positive side, and I actually kind of think this spins into the negative side as well too. To me, I know that the league-wide zone coverage rates are rising, and anytime I bring up like man coverage success rate and reception perception, that's like the first response I get. To me, being able to beat press man coverage at a high level, especially if you are an outside receiver, like that is still to me the biggest indicator of future success. Like if you can get open against man press coverage, it's just really hard to go back through the historical data and find guys that weren't, at least in the NFL, high level starting contributors. And then again, you can have arguments about, or where do they rank in terms of, are they elite? Are they very good, et cetera, et cetera. But like, again, go through the historical data on receptionperception.com, and like all of the guys that are press man coverage beaters, those are high tier players in the NFL, because league high zone coverage rate is up. But there's still a lot of situations where zone coverage is going to turn into man coverage, just based on pattern matching. There's a lot of situations, like just in high leverage moments in games, third downs, fourth downs, in the red zone, really where you want like your number one or number two wideout to shine. Man coverage rates are going to go up in those situations. So to me, like if you're going to be an outside receiver, beating man and press coverage is still the number one most important indicator. On the negative side of that, like that is obviously not great when you see a guy that's going to be an outside receiver line up and not be able to win in those press man situations. However, there are ways to work around it. And for me, it's like, I try to take that as a very like case by case situation where, okay, you're telling me this guy can't do this. Well, what can he do? Like, okay, so he can't beat press man. Is he a guy that's at least an 80% success rate for a zone player? Because then we can start to talk about what are the routes you want to use this guy Now I would say if there's one thing that just really spooks me, is, and Marcus and I used to talk about drops and do they matter, like in the NFL days, all the way back in the day. I still kind of feel the same way about drops, and that they can be noisy and like they can be a little overrated, but an overall lack of confidence in your hands and a lack of confidence working the middle of the field and how that manifests in your drop rate. That's the thing to me with a wide receiver that gets me like, yeesh, especially in today's league where the middle of the field matters so much.
All right, so first off, I want to say Dwain is nicer than me because he brought up Tyler Lockett as one of your successes. I was going to go back to the fact that you once upon a time thought Cordero Patterson was going to be the be-all, end-all of NFL wide receiver.
Now. Hey, whoa. We said this is 10 years old, reception percentage, right? So, if you actually go back and read the original Cordero Patterson article on Backyard Banter, because he was like this is Matt 10 years ago, stupid idea. That was like the second player I charted. I'm like, man, he's getting open like 49% of his routes. That's pretty good for a rookie receiver. If you like stack that into the historical database now, it's like all of the busts of the busts in like that range. So that is a lesson on like data accumulation before you make some forecasting.
Oh, I know, but I can't resist just tweaking you about it. But let's talk about some of these guys this year. Xavier Worthy, certainly climbing up a lot of draft boards for fantasy. You and I last week, we talked on the Yahoo podcast. We were wish casting guys to certain spots. I wish casted him to the Chiefs. Your eyes roll to the back of your head because you're like, this is so easy and everybody wants to do it. Lo and behold, he lands with Kansas City, which means that apparently Andy Reid listens to your show. Does Worthy have the skill set to become a number one wide receiver in that offense? Or are we just getting out ahead of ourselves because fast receiver, Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, like, let's go?
I think there's going to be, you're going to have to pay the Chiefs tax like on Xavier Worthy now at this point, which, by the way, if you look back at recent history, paying the Chiefs tax kind of mixed results, right? There's the Sky Moore, there's the Kadarius Toney, even Justin Ross for the real sickos, which I was never a part of that bandwagon. Let the record show, but I was part of the Sky Moore one. But yeah, Toney, another guy, again, just like they've always had these like gadgety sort of players that some have not worked out, some have worked out, and then Rashee Rice, if you paid the Chiefs tax on him, that really worked out for you. So to me with Xavier Worthy, he's kind of the guy that I think of when I talked about earlier, like these spread out target trees. I think the Chiefs are, and we saw proof of this last year where they were just throwing guys at the position, right? Like they were kind of just they're rotating a ton of players. The target tree was very spread out. Now it condensed the longer the season went on because I think a lot of these guys didn't step up into the opportunity. And it really condensed between Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. They bring in Hollywood Brown. They bring in Xavier Worthy. By the way, I think Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown might be like the in the comparable arc of player for Xavier Worthy. So that's a little interesting. It's only a 1-year deal for Hollywood Brown, so maybe he's not a part of their plans. But I do think there are limitations that the size brings for Xavier Worthy. Like you look at his press coverage success rate and reception perception, it's much lower than where you want it. Contested catch rate, much lower than where you want it. There's just going to be areas of the field where he's not going to, I don't think he projects to being a number one receiver in that regard. And like you look back at receivers, even just in recent history that had size-based questions, their press coverage success rates in college were much better than Xavier Worthy. I mean, Tank Dell, 83rd percentile success rate versus press. Devonta Smith, 87th percentile success rate versus press. I mean, shoot, even like Josh Downs and Zay Flowers last year, much better against press coverage. I think that is a limitation for Xavier Worthy right now. So I think he'll probably be a successful player for the Chiefs. So I don't want to like come in with my chest and say like, oh yeah, Xavier Worthy's going to be a bust or anything like that. I think they'll know how to use him. But again, I think this could be a target tree between those top 4 guys. And then like, they'll just continue to stockpile the position every single year where we've got a bunch of guys somewhere between 80 and 100 targets, but maybe not like a true number one type of wideout.
So Matt, moving on to Chicago, a guy you really love. Maybe your first all green designation. I'll let you expand on that here in a second. But it's Odunze. He lands in it's a good offense, right? I mean, I think we feel good. They're investing in the offense, but there is a lot of target competition out of the gate, right? We've got DJ Moore there. I really think is more of a wide receiver 2 profile, not an elite wide receiver 1. So it's not completely, unovercomable. But then you also have Keenan Allen, who comes over and joins, had a 30% target share last year. So Keenan's still balling, definitely getting older. But man, I did 4 best ball drafts yesterday, and 2 of them, Odunze went ahead of Keenan Allen. So like the steam is just not stopping. He's the wide receiver 29 right now in redraft leagues. Like, is that a bit frothy, even as much as you love him? Or no, Odunze is just that good, and we should just go ahead and hitch our wagons to that?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure where I come down on this one yet, to be honest, because I think I, like everyone else, still have scars from the Jackson Smith and Jigba situation last year, where he was clearly to me the best receiver in that draft class, but then he gets drafted by Seattle. And as much as I like the player, I didn't click his name a single time in a redraft league or a best ball draft last year because, like, he could be as good as he wants as a rookie. The odds that he's going to be better than DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett are like slim to none, right? And we obviously know the answer to that. Like what happened, and he had preseason injury too. You lose any time in the offseason as a receiver, unless you're Odell Beckham Jr., you're going to be in a little bit of trouble there. So I'm like the JSN conversation is kind of a whole like separate can of worms, especially in the dynasty sphere right now. But that situation is fresh in all of our minds. Now, I do think this one is a little bit different for 2 reasons. One, I like JSN, but Rome Odunze is a way better prospect than Jackson Smith and Jigba. That's the number one thing here. Yep. He's also a very different prospect, which is point number 2. But sticking on point number 1, you mentioned it, Dwain. Like, he's a guy who got open at all 3 levels. He had an above average success rate for a college prospect on every single route on the tree in reception perception. He led the class in success rate versus man, zone, and press coverage. I love his route running. Like whatever I said about not having confidence in your hands up at the top, Rome Odunze has all of the confidence in the world in his hands, and it's earned. He doesn't drop passes. He's got a great contested catch, rate overall. He is just a fantastic player that checks so many boxes. To me, the top 3 in this class was very well set in stone. They were all tier 1 prospects, where, again, to compare to last year, JSN was a tier 2 prospect in my stack rankings, but was still the number 1 receiver in that class. These guys are all tier 1 prospects. They are worthy of top 10 picks where they all got drafted. They are like ready-made to be NFL starters and eventually superstars in the league. But the conversation that was harder to me was who's better, Rome Odunze or Marvin Harrison. That was the one I struggled with the most. That's just how big of a fan I am of Rome Odunze. So that's why it's different from JSN, number 1. Yeah. Number 2, like, again, Dwain, this doing the utilization report, it's like a lot of what matters is how often are you truly going to be on the field. And if you're that slot only player, you're the one that's going to lose out, which is why JSN, I think, had a little bit of target trouble last year, especially in the context of the Seahawks offense. When they go to 12 personnel, again, you can be as good as you want. You're not going to take DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett off the field. I think Keenan Allen is a slot only player at this point. I think he's still a very good player. I know his target rate was great last year. The yards per route run still very good. But he's clearly a diminished player. He's only on a 1-year deal. I think he at this point is coming off a season that was, just from an on-film perspective, lesser than what Tyler Lockett was coming off in 2022. So that's the veteran receiver sort of parallel here. And I just think if you're going 2 receiver sets, yeah, Keenan Allen can definitely be on the field. DJ Moore's probably on the field, but there's going to be opportunities for Rome Odunze to also be on the field there because he's that pure classic X receiver, whereas Keenan Allen is not. So I think that right now, just before we really learn more information, I do think the ADP that you have here is kind of right. I think DJ Moore is the one who should stand alone there, and I do think it's going to be pretty close in terms of Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze there. I'm just not sure I have a lot of conviction on saying oh yeah, this guy's going to outproduce the other.
Yeah, I went back and dug into this yesterday, so I'll just share the data that I was able to pull together. And I kind of had a similar thought process to you. I think the ADP it's not outrageous. He can pay it off. My question is, how much upside can he give you from where he's currently getting drafted? But I think there's a couple of outs. One, he wins the outside role and he's on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. Or 2, they just decide we've got these 3 great wide receivers. let's just play 11 personnel more. I mean, Shane Waldron does come from the Sean McVay tree. It doesn't always feel that way with the way that Shane Waldron runs the offense. But I mean, McVay has had some seasons where, I mean, we're talking over 80% of the time running 11 personnel. Like, so that could also happen. Like if Odunze is just that good in camp and Keenan and DJ Moore are all feeling it, maybe they just use more personnel. But I went back to 2011 and there are 34 rookies that carved out the number 3 role in their passing attack. I think from a pure targets per route run, target share, we have to start with saying Odunze is the 3, right? Maybe he carves out number 2, but we've seen 34 guys that got to that role on their offense. 9 of them reached top 36 status. So 26% of them that carved out that number 3 role went on to be top 36. They averaged 12.9 fantasy points per contest, which isn't terrible. Here are the names. So you can tell us, Matt, like if you had to pick like which guy this is closest to, it's gonna be a tough decision because a really big name and then it drops off. But we've got Julio Jones. If you guys remember, he came in and we had Roddy White still doing his thing, and I can't even remember who else it was that was holding back Julio.
Michael Jenkins still?
Maybe. It is weird that he would be the wide receiver 3. And the way I did it was based on minimum 8 games played, targets per game for the team. It might have been actually, was it Tony Gonzalez? Because I did for the whole team.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Where they fell for the team.
Yeah.
So it was probably Roddy White, number 1, Tony Gonzalez, number 2, Julio, number 3. But he averaged 15.7 fantasy points per game. That was good for wide receiver 12. Juju Smith-Schuster comes in and does it for the Steelers, 13.7. He's wide receiver 18. Now, I'm not going to name all of these, but the rest of these guys were all between wide receiver 30 and wide receiver 35. Claypool, Addison, Debo, Tyreek Hill, T.Y. Hilton, Christian Watson, Torrey Smith. So, like, when I looked at this list, I was like, Odunze grades out ahead of all those dudes, like, for me.
Yeah.
But he's not quite Julio. So, like, can you sandwich him in somewhere in between? And maybe there is this shot that he could potentially squeeze out a wide receiver 24. But I don't know, man. I'm thinking wide receiver 29. I think he can probably pay it off. But, plus, we still got a rookie quarterback. We can't just assume Caleb is going to be C.J. Stroud. That's the other part.
Yeah, that's the thing, that there's a lot of just unknowns here. And I mean, Cole Kmet's not like a total stone zero player, right? And DeAndre Swift's going to catch some passes, and Caleb's going to take some air out of the passing game just because he's going to scramble a little bit is my estimation here. You know, it's funny, like, again, to do the Seattle example, Geno had like 3,800 passing yards and over 20 touchdowns last year. If Caleb Williams as a rookie does that, we're gonna be like, wow, really good. That's a really good rookie season, you know? And again, we came away kind of wanting with all 3 of those Seahawks receivers last year. And that's my initial read on this Chicago situation, is that I feel like everybody who drafts a Chicago receiver this year maybe isn't going to be, super upset. Like, they're not like, oh man, I had a bust on my hands, unless one of these guys gets injured. But I do think everybody could come away that clicked a Bears receiver feeling like, I wanted just a little bit more from this.
Swish. That is the sound of our parlay hitting. That's right. We've teamed up with DraftKings Sportsbook for the NBA playoffs. And right now, they are giving new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly when they bet just $5 on any wager. Don't miss your shot. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using our promo code DEBRIEF. The crown is yours. Look at that. Awesome. All right. Sounds good. See ya. Let's look at Keon Coleman, because it's been a good draft week, I think, around Keon Coleman. One, because so far the content that he has given us has been amazing. His press conferences have been super entertaining, but also lands in a good spot. He's got Josh Allen as his quarterback. They don't have a true wide receiver 1 now that Stephon Diggs is gone. When you look at Coleman, I mean, his strengths and weaknesses, what are they, and how does that fit in what Buffalo wants to do offensively?
Yeah, strengths. He is, again, sort of the antithesis of the player I outlined before that freaks me out at the top, and that he is a guy who has incredible confidence in his hands and can work the middle of the field really well. I think he's got a good sense of zone coverage. I think he's got a good feel for working the middle of the field and like working leverage and knowing when to cross guys' face in zone coverage or when to break routes at a certain depth. Just an overall, I think, pretty smart player. The problem is the weaknesses are pretty glaring too, where he is a guy who's 20th percentile success rate versus man coverage, 19th percentile success rate versus press. I won't bore you guys with all the percentile data and like some of the like guys you forgot about. at the wide receiver position that scored out this way as prospects. I have a video on my YouTube page if people want to go check that out. You can also read the Keon Coleman profile, but like all of the guys who score like this in terms of lower success rate versus press and man coverage. Prior to this draft class, there were 32 prospects I charted who were below the 35th percentile in success rate versus man press or against zone coverage as well, all three. By my count, there's really only like, 5 true success stories. There are guys like Christian Watson or Will Fuller or DJ Chark, these kind of like volatile deep threats, but like the 5 true inarguable hits to me are Amon-Ra St. Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Rashee Rice. Cooper Kupp is on this list because he was not great against man press in college, but really high against zone coverage. And then the 5th one was Tyler Boyd. All of those guys,
slot.
they all got to play slot. They were, if they weren't slot receivers in college, they moved from the perimeter to being like Rashee Rice. Such a dramatically different role what he did as a rookie versus what I charted him as at SMU. So the problem for Keon Coleman is that like Brandon Beane comes out right away and says he's going to be our X receiver, which that does have me a little bit nervous in terms of being I'm not going to say he can't be a successful player at X, but I don't think you're going to get the best use of him there. Now, you can still do certain things with a guy that fits into this bucket. Like I think post ACL, Cortland Sutton fits into this bucket of players who struggle to consistently separate on the outside, but like had a pretty nice season last year because of the way they used him on in-breaking routes. I mean, a dramatic amount of his targets came on crossers and slants and, in that sort of Sean Payton offense. Obviously, Joe Brady comes off that tree as well from his time with the New Orleans Saints, and then he goes to LSU and moves on, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think Keon Coleman can be a fine player there. But to me, if we're talking about number 1 receivers, there's just not a lot of guys that are below average separators, especially as outside receivers against man press coverage who become true number 1s. Like you can get your Alshon Jeffrey types. But that's probably like the peak of it. The Cortland Sutton, that's like the peak of it, like the player archetype that I'm talking about here. And I mean, could the Bills use maybe a slightly better version of Cortland Sutton on the roster? I mean, hell yeah, they could use that, right? Just based on what they had going into it. I just think the expectations with Coleman, there's a chance that it gets way out of whack. And then I also think on the other side that like, I'm not going to say he's not a terrible player. Like he's a good prospect with certain strengths, and he went on day 2, which is where I thought he should have gone all along, was on day 2. So the Bills sort of fit into this group, this team that like might be what we talk about with the Chiefs, where they got a bunch of guys between like 80 and 100 targets, but no like true number 1 target earner.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So what we'll be listening for is a switch to slot wide receiver. I will say the market is pretty chill right now on Coleman so far. I do think it's going to steam. We just had a major best ball competition. You guys probably never heard of it. Open up yesterday. But I went back and looked at the 4 drafts I did last night, and Keon Coleman was around 8, 9. I could see that steaming towards 7, pretty quickly, given the landing spot and the quarterback and the uncertainty around the position. Also really interesting is that only 21% of his targets in his career came in that 10 to 19 yard window. I'm a big believer with you, Harmon, that's the sweet spot now with how deep safeties are playing. That's where quarterbacks want to move the chain. It still gives them a chance to make big plays without having to take the risk of pushing the ball downfield into coverage, which can lead to turnover worthy plays. You still got to be smart, work in the middle of the field, but any analytic like heat map you look at shows you the EPA per pass play. That's where it gets blue, which blue is typically good, right, on those heat maps. So that was kind of interesting because he didn't do that well. He was 9% below the average college wide receiver, a number of targets coming intermediate. So was there anything like that you saw with that? Was that something that maybe he developed more, later in his career, or is it just something that maybe it was the games you charted versus what I'm looking at?
Well, it's interesting because I would say that his 2 best routes in terms of getting open, and his route chart obviously looks terrible because there's a lot of red on it. But the 2 routes where he's like at the prospect average are the dig route and the curl route, which again, I'd love to see him getting free releases against zone coverage running those routes. But like that to me sort of fits into that bucket there for the most part, like over 10 yards, intermediate level of the field. We also have to acknowledge like with any, non-reception perception data for Keon Coleman, Jordan Travis, not a very good quarterback. Also, right. A very erratic player, and then dealt with injuries as well too. So Yeah, I think Keon Coleman's like he's not the most difficult evaluation in this class, but he's up there in terms of, I think he is a good player. I'm just kind of stuck on what the ceiling is for Keon Coleman. And like that's another thing too, where I just feel like we're going to come away from the 2024 NFL season and be like, you know what Buffalo needs? Like another receiver, especially if Curtis Samuel doesn't work out. Like, and he
scares me. He scares me. I think he has a lot of bust potential, like the way he grades out in the supermodel over at Fantasy Life. So
very, very, he is a lot of the guys that went on day 2, a lot of the big guys that went on day 2, all are kind of that, like, we'll see type of archetype.
Yeah. So let's talk about another one. Ladd McConkey also goes early in the second round, lands with a good quarterback as well, and Justin Herbert. Yeah, we know that Jim Harbaugh is going to run the ball 74,000 times a game. That's going to be what he wants to do, but it's a wide open depth chart, right? I mean, Josh Palmer's not a legit wide receiver 1, probably more of a wide receiver 3, if you ask me. Looking at Quentin Johnston, he's still young. Maybe it can get better, but it was not good in year 1. And so I'm not very encouraged. Like I wouldn't be surprised like if Quentin Johnston can't get on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. And McConkey, what's interesting about him is a lot of people, early on, I think now, like people are onto it and they understand what McConkey is. But I remember early, it was really more, slot wide receiver going to play underneath. Yeah. But that's really not his game. 69% of his routes came outside and really layered all the areas of the field that you would want to see. Now, his target rates were not as high against man, but he was an absolute monster against zone and still passable against man. 23% targets per route run, which is still pretty good. What are your thoughts on McConkey being able to carve out like a full-time role here? Because I think it's like really people are looking at him and Keon Coleman as being those guys early round 2 that got the landing spots, but which one do I want to put my chip on?
Yeah, I feel a lot better about Ladd McConkey as a player. And you're right that it's a wide open depth chart there, right? Like with Buffalo, I'm the world's foremost Curtis Samuel truther. So that's part of it. I also think
hey, Ian's trying to challenge you for that, by the way, I think. So, we'll have to get you on with Ian. You guys can argue that.
Yeah, we'll fight that one out. He'll put up the backfield reps. I'll put up the actual routes. We'll see who wins. I like
shots fired.
I like Khalil Shakir. I really think he's shown some positive flashes in the league. Whereas, you outline the situation in LA. I'm with you that Josh Palmer is like an acceptable wide receiver 3. Like not, we got Josh Palmer as our wide receiver 3. It's like, all right, we got Josh Palmer as our wide receiver 3. Yeah. We can feel pretty good about that. But he's the most established player on the roster because Quentin Johnston, you said it, Dwayne, but you also didn't say it's strong enough. Like, yeah, it was bad as a rookie. It was probably about as bad as it could be. Like, if you look at his reception, perception, success rates, which will hit the site here in a couple of weeks, because I got even more work to do post-draft somehow. Quentin Johnston, like where he grades out in RP is in like the Jalen Reagor zone. It's in like the Marquise Lee zone. So it's like not where you want Devin Funch's zone. It's not really where you want to be in terms of like a highly drafted wide receiver prospect that got a lot of playing time as a rookie. So anything we could get from him. And look, they didn't do him any favors by throwing him out as an X receiver and having him do like all the things that he was bad at in college. That was just horrible scouting, horrible deployment of the player. And a horrible realization of like, well, yeah, sure, maybe he can develop as our 4th receiver this year. Well, all your top guys get injured, okay? So you should have seen this one coming. They didn't see it coming. We saw the results. So now it's just like anything you get from him is gravy, in my opinion, at this point. But like Ladd McConkey, such a clean, I think, projection to the pros. You mentioned it that he's more of a vertical receiver than like a bunny hop, lunch pail, gritty slot receiver. He's a guy who wins on out routes. 13.5% of his routes and reception perception were out routes, 83.3% success rate, high post route success rate, high 9 route success rate, corner routes. He can really rip you deep, especially if you give him a free release. Number 3 in the class in success rate versus zone coverage. Number 4 against man coverage. Now, he's not a true press coverage beater, but that is something you can work around, right? By just throw Josh Palmer or Quentin Johnston out there at the X receiver and let him just like eat up grass over there. And you give Ladd McConkey free releases. You move him around the line of scrimmage. I'm really high on Ladd. I think he could end up, because of the landing spot questions for Brian Thomas, who has, some target competition there. And, what is the Jacksonville Jaguars passing offense really? Rome Odunze, we talk about the target competition there. Malik Neighbors is playing with Daniel Jones, and he doesn't even really know his name. So, I mean, like Ladd McConkey could end up being one of the most productive rookie receivers this year, just based on his own skill, how easy it translates to the league, and also obviously playing with Justin Herbert.
You guys heard it here first.
Yeah,
Ladd McConkey, #1 overall per Matt Harmon.
Well, I did give up one certain receiver that plays in Arizona now, but maybe 102.
Okay, there we go. We'll go with that. Good old Daniel Jones throwing balls to Malik Neighbors out there in New York. Troy Franklin, a guy that we thought was going to be a first-round pick. That was certainly what a lot of the chatter was leading into the draft, and he was sort of, I guess he was the Tom Petty player, right? He was free falling for a while. Sean Payton, who likes to let us think that he's some sort of puppet master. I don't know. In his mind, he probably orchestrated. He probably pulled the strings to make this happen for him landing in Denver. I mean, you mentioned Courtland Sutton, who, as of now, is still a Denver Bronco. Where does Troy Franklin fit in? And based on what you saw in reception perception, do you see reasons for him falling, or did a whole lot of teams just mess up?
Well, there were definitely some, quote, character concerns or some interview concerns and off-field concerns, the nebulous off-field concerns, the term that we throw around with Troy Franklin. Like, that was info that was around pre-draft. I still didn't think he was going to fall at day 3. But I also think that the NFL realized there are some serious, problems with his on-field profile. I thought he was overrated as kind of like a guy that was going in first round of dynasty draft before the draft. Some people had him. I don't know where you guys had him, but like wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. He was never really in that consideration to me, even though there are some really positive marks in his RP profile. Like 70.3% success rate versus man is pretty solid. 82.4% success rate versus zone is pretty solid. But everything I outlined in terms of the guys that really freak me out in terms of they don't trust their hands and they can't work the middle of the field, I might as well have just said, the Troy Franklin profile really freaks me out. You look at his success rate on dig routes, his success rate on slant routes, both of those are problematic results. Anytime there's any sort of contact in the route, there are issues. 26th percentile success rate versus press. Let's not even talk about the drop rate. Let's not even talk about the contested catch rate, which are both also issues. I think he has some upside, and I think round 4, Troy Franklin, sign me up. I'm cool with that, especially on this depth chart where he's reuniting with his college quarterback. He's got a coach that I think will deploy him. That's not going to throw him out there at X receiver. Like he was playing X receiver at Oregon. Ain't no way he's playing X receiver in the NFL, especially if you want him work in the middle of the field. So I do kind of like the landing spot for Troy Franklin. I think he's a guy that's going to get dinged in dynasty, but we got to severely ding where we thought, or where the industry consensus was before the draft at this point, because of the draft capital, and I think because of the concerns with him on the field.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when a player falls that much, it only takes one team to reach and change expectations around a player's draft capital, but it takes a lot of teams working together to let someone slide. Now, that's not always great. Like Aaron Rodgers ended up being great despite sliding. Randy Moss slid down for off the field concerns. We've seen it many times. And if it's truly off the field, I think sometimes the player can overcome that. But whenever there's the on the field stuff, like what you're talking about, that does worry me even more. But on the opposite side of that coin, we've got, Ricky Pearsall ends up being a late first round pick to the 49ers. Really shocked a lot of people because even though there's the idea, right, that they, are kind of getting pressured from Brandon Ayuk, not kind of, they're being pressured. He wants his new contract, rightfully so, because he's a badass. But they've already got Deebo Samuel. They got George Kittle. There was thought, well, maybe they'll trade one of these guys, but they didn't. And they still go ahead and add Pearsall to the team at the end of the first round. And there's perhaps nobody, Matt, that's risen more than Pearsall from where he was at the beginning, right, of this draft analysis. For me, I get a little concerned. So I really want to hear your thoughts. Maybe I'm wrong on him. I hear what a great route runner he is. I've heard it from multiple people. You've had really positive things to say about him, but for me, when I look at a player like that, I always get concerned when I see, but they never really turned into a dominant target earner. And it's one thing to have bad quarterback play impact your yardage, yards per catch. But typically, if you're good and you get open, most of the time, your quarterback will throw it to you. I think there are exceptions. And it's not like he played at loaded programs. He did have some good competition each step of the way. He's older. He played with Brandon Ayuk. People don't realize some of this. He played a little with Kyle Pitt. I don't think he overlapped with Pitts because I think when he transferred to Florida, he was already gone. Yeah. So looking at Pearsall, like, what am I missing on him? Or is he a player that you think the 49ers still might have reached on, even though you like him?
I had him ranked as a late round 1, early round 2,
Nice.
like fringe type of player. So he went where I thought he should go. I love Ricky Pearsall's game, man. Number 2 in the class in success rate versus man coverage, which is hilarious that, like, what was the biggest conversation coming out of the 49ers Super Bowl loss a few short months ago is, man, Brandon Ayuk can beat man coverage. Nobody else can. Nobody else can get open when these defenses want to really challenge them on the line of scrimmage and run like real big boy routes. Well, they got a guy that can do that in Ricky Pearsall. 75.8% success rate versus man. Again, that's second in the class, behind only Odunze, 87th percentile. I'm with you, Dwayne, that like the journey of him as a collegiate player is not clean. Right. He's not one of these early guys. He didn't like ever really truly dominate. Maybe I don't know if he has the ceiling of being like a number 1 receiver, but I think he's a very useful player in the league. Maybe like a high end number 2. If we're being honest, guys, like this whole class is maybe filled with a lot more of these, like, yeah, that's a useful player, but outside of the big 3,
Agreed.
like I don't know if we have a bunch of guys that are like sleeping superstars. And then like I just did my dynasty rankings post draft on the wide receivers. I'm like, man, I get down to like wide receiver 50 and I'm like, you know what? I can see where this player is pretty useful if everything breaks right. There's just like a glut of these guys in the league right now. And this class didn't make it any like more clear. So anyways, bigger conversation there. But I think Pearsall, if we're talking about that next tier of guys, even below, like a little bit below Brian Thomas, like very useful player. I think Pearsall is going to be that guy. Rock solid hands, rock solid route running. The film last year at Florida was just really good. The offense is just extremely dysfunctional still. So I understand why the 49ers made this pick too, again, with the man coverage stuff that I talked about. And, I think one thing that this coaching tree is sort of learning, and I think you saw this in Houston last year too, like you can be as efficient as you want on early downs. And like, yeah, you want to be an efficient early down passing team, but like a lot of these Shanahan acolytes, like their drop back pass game kind of sucks. Like I think Miami struggles with this sometimes too. The Texans were a huge offender of this. And I think even the original, the prototype version in San Francisco has issues here. And you really solve that by having a wealth of receiving options where you can create mismatches and just have guys that will win on their own. Deebo Samuel, as great as he is not a win on his own, against press man coverage type of player. Pearsall can be that guy.
So I'm excited just as a fan, excited to see kind of what Pearsall can do in this offense, and sort of bracing myself for the departure of probably Deebo Samuel. We'll see what happens if they decide to finally move on from him. Meanwhile, in Carolina, we know last year their issues with wide receivers, the fact that for a while it was Adam Thielen, the ghost of Adam Thielen, that was kind of carrying it as much as possible during the season. They go out, they get Xavier Legette at the end of round 1. And I know that he didn't necessarily come out all that well in Dwayne's supermodel. People are drafting him based on landing spot because, look, there's Deontay Johnson there. I think Adam Thielen is going to, start to kind of exit stage left. So Legette does have an opportunity for targets. Was there something you saw from him in reception perception that you can make a case that maybe he's more than just landing spot for fantasy?
He is the most difficult evaluation in this class, where, like I said, there are some times where I go back and forth on Keon Coleman. I think Troy Franklin is kind of a difficult evaluation, but like he went in the 4th round. Who cares? Like Xavier Legette goes to the end of the 1st round. The Panthers kind of maybe needlessly traded up one spot to get Xavier Legette, just so they get, lock in the 5th year. I love how like 3 years ago, it's like, you want a round 1 pick to lock in that 5th year option. Meanwhile, ain't none of these guys really making it to their 5th year option at this point before they're like demanding a new contract. So I hope that 5th year option treats you well. But anyway, so Legette, like he's a guy that is important to get right. And man, he's really difficult. Like, I mean, Dwayne can speak to all of the like statistical profile reasons why he's just he's like not even just a hard evaluation, just an evaluation you never see before. You never see a guy spend 5 years at
I don't like him, Matt. I'm scared. I'm scared to death to click on the man.
100%. And like, I'm not going to tell you a lot that's going to make you feel better about Legette, because he fits into that same bucket where I talked about with Keon Coleman, where he is a sub 35th. He's actually a sub 20th percentile against man and press coverage. He is extremely raw as a route runner and he's like we just talked about Ricky Pearsall. He's a guy that's like a late breakout player, 23 years old in his final season in college. Xavier Legette, same thing, but like he's not the refined technician that a Ricky Pearsall is. He's out
and
there
no
like,
build up. At least Pearsall did build up to that, getting better every year. Legette was like just terrible, and then suddenly just booms in his final season.
Right, but that's the crazy thing is that he legit boomed. Like it wasn't just
I agree.
Yeah, he had a real nice season to end his collegiate career. No, he had like a crazy season to end his collegiate
in
career.
the SEC. Yes,
in the SEC, high level of target or high level of competition with a guy in Spencer Rattler who is talented but an erratic player. And when you look at Legette's reception perception profile, he is a guy who, like I said, struggles to beat press man coverage. I don't think he is a true X receiver. Don't think despite the size, but does have good hands, really good in contested situations, 62nd percentile success rate versus zone, 81.4%. That's pretty good. You look at the routes that he's really good, like he's legitimately good on. Whereas like Keon Coleman, I'm like, okay, I can see that if he's used the right way. Like slants, digs, crossers, stuff like that. Legette, if he has a free release and he can get rolling against zone, he can not just get open and like feel out the coverage well. He's going to make you pay with big plays in the open field because he's just a freak show. Like he is truly a special athlete out there. That's just, again, very hyper specific, what I just outlined there. Now, I think Dave Canales is a smart coach. I have a lot of respect for Canales and what he's done as a play caller and play designer. But he outlined this when he was talking about Xavier Legette in his post-draft press conference. He basically highlighted all the things I just said there, like mixed and varied alignment, working him over the middle of the field, but just how many targets does that amount to for like a fantasy purpose? I don't know. When like you have a guy in Deontay Johnson who like gets open on his own and creates real separation. You have a guy in Thielen that a lot of empty calories production last year. I think, I'm with Marcus that I think Thielen's got to start. We got to start pushing that out of the rotation here. I don't know. I just, like I said, not a lot of conviction on Xavier Legette, but he is definitely a guy that I bet based on my dynasty rankings, I will probably not end up getting in a lot of rookie drafts.
So you're at the end of the first round, which is kind of where he's going to get pushed to because he got taken in the first round. I'm totally fine just taking Ladd McConkey and going on my way, and not dealing with Legette.
Yeah, dude, I don't even think that's like close.
I agree. Okay. Yeah. And they're going in the same range. So that's why I bring it up. I'm with you. I just don't see a way I'm going to end up clicking on him. So maybe I'll get a little bit of exposure to him in redraft if he falls to me here or there. But yeah, I heard those same quotes and I thought, well, it's interesting you're talking about this, but I'm also not like, it doesn't embolden me anymore when I hear one of the first things you mentioned in your cut-ups is you saw him working out of the backfield and in motion. And I'm like, well, that could also be just really bad if you think you're going to need that for the guy you just spent a first round pick on. Anyway, so we've got a couple other guys here real quick where we've got depth charts that don't offer a lot. And we've got a young rookie quarterback in Drake May in New England. And they shot off two rounds here. Round two, top of round two, kind of surprise, a little bit, better than what some people thought for Polk. Although we did have Peter Schrager come out, who ended up being, the mock drafter of the year. He came out and said that, Polk might be a late first round pick, a couple of weeks ago. He ended up being closer to right than wrong with Polk going at the top of the second round. But then we also have Javon Baker, who the Patriots circled back around to pick up in the fourth round. What are your thoughts on these two players? And any hope for one of them to turn into maybe a wide receiver 2 type player in fantasy land, given the fact they're going to have a runway to get snaps here pretty quickly?
Yeah, I love what the Patriots did at wide receiver. Not a reach for me in terms of Ja'Lynn Polk. I had him as a priority round 2 ranking, which is where he went, right? Early round 2.
Yep.
Man, I think Ja'Lynn Polk's just a rock solid player. Number 2 in success rate versus zone coverage among the prospects I charted behind only his teammate, Odunze. Also probably the second best contested, or at least, top 3 up there with Odunze and Marvin Harrison in contested catches. He really is a true ball winner. Even in tight spaces, I think that's a good fit with Drake May. Like, guys, I like Drake May. I don't have like a lot of like a strong take on what I think his NFL future is. He just has like the tools I like to bet on. But the one thing I always say with him is, man, what an intense case of whiplash that guy had to go through after having Josh Downs as his top receiver in 22 to Tez Walker. Like, you could not get from a skill set a talent, like a bigger gap there, just like the way that guy's going to help you. And like Ja'Lynn Polk's that reliable player who's going to get open versus zone and has good hands, going to be where he's supposed to be. He's going to win in tight spaces. I think that's a good fit with Drake May. I think Polk is going to start early in his NFL career and inhale a lot of targets. He's not going to have a Puka Nacua season, but like the way Puka Nacua worked it with the Rams last year, over the middle, dig routes, crossing routes, get him rumbling there, kind of just a true rugged, dirty work player. That's sort of the bucket that Polk fits into me. Robert Woods-ish for sure. The kind of what we thought Puka was doing early on was like, yeah, he's playing that Robert Woods role. He kind of ended up just being a player all to himself because he was that good. So I think that's sort of my thoughts on Ja'Lynn Polk. And then it's crazy too, because Javon Baker, I also had ranked as a priority round 2 pick, and they got him in the 4th round. He's much more developmental, but he fits as an X receiver, right? Like, and that's a position that's hard to find like a true target earner at that X receiver position. And I think he can be that guy. Like, he shows an ability to run real routes, get open down the field, strong hands overall. Like I said, he's a bit more developmental because he comes from one of these Big 12 offenses where he lines up on one side of the field. Not always, but definitely his last season only lined up on one side of the field, and runs like a go route on 35% of his routes. There's going to have to be some development that takes place there. But if he can learn kind of behind Kendrick Bourne as the other outside receiver here, you have Ja'Lynn Polk as your Z, you have Demario Douglas as your slot guy. Like, that's the makings of a pretty solid receiver room. I love what New England did at the draft at wide receiver. And I haven't said that, but I probably haven't said that in the full decade I've been doing.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you ever said that? Yeah. And people are ignoring them right now in drafts. So Polk, not necessarily rookie drafts, but even in rookie drafts, like Polk, with what you just said, maybe there's an argument that like he should be a pick you consider at the end of round 1 rather than a Keon Coleman or a Legette, right? That have, just more red flags in general. But right now in best ball, I did 4 drafts yesterday. I drafted one of these 2 receivers on all of them, and nobody's messing with them. The other rookie receivers are way ahead of where these guys are. So just something for the listeners, while you can, because people will pick up on these names and they'll start going higher. But right now you can get them for almost nothing.
Yeah. Want to ask you, who is your favorite sleeper that we haven't talked about so far that you think could really push for some significant playing time this year, and why is it Jermaine Burton?
I was going to say, well, it's Jermaine Burton. As you know, Marcus, I said that if he was drafted by the Bills, you were going to have to be a good friend and keep me from just like overdrafting the hell out of Jermaine Burton. Well, he went to the Cincinnati Bengals in round 3, which was actually a lot higher than I thought he was going to go. I thought there was a chance he'd go like in the 5th round, just based on the character concerns and stuff like that. So actually this is just as dire of a situation, Marcus. So I will need you to be a good friend and kind of help me out on this one. But I did a similar thing with Jermaine Burton that I did with Jaden Reed last year, which is like I put a pretty big bet on him in terms of like my dynasty rankings. Like, this is a guy that if you use my rankings to draft in your rookie draft, you're probably going to end up with Jermaine Burton basically every time. Because, and I'm not saying that's good advice. Okay. Just that's the reality.
What's going to happen if you use Fantasy Live as well? He was the biggest takeaway from the supermodel as far as grading out ahead of what the industry was saying. So I'm loving hearing this.
That's good to hear. Like, just on film, he's a round 1 prospect to me. He's 3rd in the class in success rate versus man coverage. Against press, he's 4th. Everything about that profile, other than, again, the character concerns, that's a guy I'm betting on, 7 days out of the week. Okay. Like, he's a guy who wins down the field. He wins in contested situations. I love this landing spot for him, not just because the Bengals felt good about him enough to take him in the 3rd round. I think they have the quarterback that can be like, hey, Jermaine, focus up. Let's get on board here. And they obviously have a screaming need at wideout beyond this year, because I don't think T. Higgins is going to be retained by this team. And they have a need this year too. Like, they didn't bring back Tyler Boyd. I think Jermaine Burton's going to get on the field. I think what we probably see this year is Jamar Chase plays like a career high percentage of snaps in the slot, and Jermaine Burton gets on the field as the other outside receiver, just because he's that good. Now, maybe like Charlie Jones ends up being their slot receiver, and this looks stupid, but I think overall, he's like a aggressive, angry Chris Olave type is Jermaine Burton, and putting that on the Bengals offense does sound pretty appealing.
If you don't mind me asking, how high do you have him?
I have him in the class. I have him as my 44th overall receiver in Dynasty, and I have him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 wide receiver 8 in the class.
Okay. If people hear me clicking buttons, like I'm just considering, do I go ahead and move them up a little more? Because hearing somebody else saying the same things, I've God, what do I have him as? I have him at like 8 or 9 right now, so
Yeah.
I'll have to double check it after. But yeah,
I know it's so
I fell in
stupid
love.
yeah, me too. I know it's so stupid, like on paper, to think this guy goes in the 3rd round and he's never going to be the number 1 receiver on his team, even if T. Higgins moves on, because like it's Jamar Chase. He's never going to be better than Jamar Chase. And I know it's
Joe
like,
Burrow, and they throw the ball a lot.
Exactly. That, yeah, 100%. And like Keon Coleman went early round 2, like AD Mitchell went in round 2. Ja'Lynn Polk, even a player I like, and Xavier Legette obviously went in the 1st round, but just like, Burton's better than those guys as a player. And like, would I rather have Bryce Young's number 1 receiver? Maybe. By the way, maybe Bryce Young's number 1 receiver, or would I rather have Joe Burrow's long-term potential number 2, who has round 1 talent? Like, I think I know where I want to go on that.
Well,
I have him wide receiver 12, so I've got to. I may have to move him up some
You got
more.
some catching up to do, buddy.
Yeah, I do, and I felt aggressive, but hearing you, I'm like, dang, okay, I love it though.
Oh man, well,
I think you're most going to get him if you draft him where I have him, but I don't know. We might have to race on this. We'll see. Harmon.
I
We'll
just
see
think
who
he's going to be I think he's going to be an interesting sort of test case, right? How people feel about him versus the landing spot. And I do think people are keeping an eye on the T. Higgins situation, and obviously that's going to have a really, really big impact on what happens with Jermaine Burton. But man, that one I think is going to be very, very intriguing for sure. Matt. Dude, I always love talking to you, man. It was good to actually see you face to face in person for a little while this weekend, but always appreciate the information. Always love what you're doing at Reception Perception. Always love what you're doing over at Yahoo. When are we getting the Brock Bowers chart?
I mean, just absolutely outrageous for you to say all those nice things to me, and I was feeling so good about our I mean, I've been doing Reception Perception a little bit longer than we've been friends, Marcus, but not that much longer.
And you got me with the Kyle Pitts April Fool's thing.
And by the way, the person who was most fooled by that was me. I had nothing to do with that. That is Marcus has met Zach Miller, the real brains behind Reception Perception, in terms of actually keeping the website operational and doing, just being a true jack of all trades and master of all as well. He's brought up so much goodwill in the company that he can do that, like put out a Kyle Pitts. I remember I saw that and I was like, what? Oh, okay. I got April Fools on that one too.
Oh man. Well,
you're like, who hacked my account?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But dude, always appreciate it, man. Always look forward to, one, seeing what you're putting out, but also just, talking with you, whether it's about ball or life or what have you. Be well, man. We'll talk soon.
Appreciate you guys for having me. Thank you. It was awesome.
Absolutely. And that's a good plot for us to put this down to for the week as well. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Thanks to James Lynch for putting this whole thing together. Also, be sure to go over, check out the rookie supermodels if you want to get some more information about what we think about some of these guys, what Dwain thinks about some of these guys, especially as best ball drafts are up and running and people are really diving into them. A good time to do that. And while you're there, if you haven't already, sign up for the newsletter. In the meantime, that'll do it for this edition of the Utilization Report Debrief. Thanks again to Matt Harmon. For Dwain McFarland, I am Marcus Grant. Enjoy the week. Enjoy your best ball drafts, everybody. And we'll talk to you again real soon.